You know, throughout history, there's one organ that's been held up as this ultimate symbol of power, of strength, of masculinity. But what happens when that powerful cultural symbol is built on a biological system that's, well, surprisingly fragile? Let's dive into the manhood paradox.
So our guide on this journey is a book called Manhood by Mels van Driel, who's a urologist. And he draws on decades of actual medical practice to explore this really complex connection between our cultural ideas of what masculinity is and the biology that's working underneath.
I mean, for thousands of years, the cultural story has been pretty much the same. The phallus isn't just an organ, right? It's an icon. It stands for virility, for dominance, for creative force. It's supposed to be the physical proof of masculine ideals like determination and, well, penetration.
But, and this is the big question we're going to unpack today, what if the biological reality of that organ runs on principles that are the exact opposite of power and force? What then?
Okay, first things first. Let's really establish just how deeply embedded this symbol is in our cultures. We're going to see how society took a piece of anatomy and just loaded it up with this immense significance.
And this is not some modern thing. It is woven through ancient history. You look at ancient Greece. They were parading massive phalluses during religious festivals. In Egypt, the god of sexual power, Min, was almost always shown holding his. In Hindu creation myths talk about a dazzling lingam of enormous size. And the Roman god Priapus, he was basically defined by his. The pattern is crystal clear. This organ got elevated to like a divine status.
And this right here really captures that shift. Van Driel points out that because it was so visible, it was easy to just pile meaning onto it. It became this container for all of society's ideas about vitality, about immortality, and morality, carrying a symbolic weight that goes way beyond its actual biological job.
All right, so keep that cultural expectation of pure power in your head. Now, let's pivot and look at the biological reality, because as you're about to see, it is a very different story.
At its core, the male reproductive system is this really intricate network. You've got the testicles, which are making sperm and key hormones, and then a whole series of ducts, like the epididymis and ductus deferens, that are basically the plumbing, the transport system for everything. It's a complex and coordinated biological machine.
And the fuel for this whole machine? Mostly testosterone. It's made in the testicles, and it's kind of the master regulator. It's not just about libido, it is absolutely essential for producing sperm and just for maintaining the entire physical structure of the reproductive system. So now let's get into the mechanics of it. The penis itself is basically, as Van Driel calls it, a big blood sausage. It's made of these 3 chambers of spongy erectile tissue. An erection isn't about flexing a muscle, it's a hydraulic event. It happens when these chambers just get totally engorged with blood. So, how does this hydraulic event actually work? It's basically a 3-step process. First, the arteries open wide, letting blood rush in. Second, and this is the most important part, the smooth muscle cells inside that spongy tissue have to completely relax to let the chambers fill up. Finally, all that swelling pinches the exit veins shut, trapping the blood inside and creating firmness.
And here it is. This is the crucial point of the whole thing. For the system to achieve what our culture calls power, it biologically needs relaxation. Not force, not tension, not willpower, but a complete letting go. This is the fundamental paradox sitting right at the heart of manhood.
So this brings us to the collision point. What happens when that cultural demand for absolute power slams into the biological need for total relaxation? Well, you get a paradox, and it creates a very unique kind of pressure.
And this just lays out the conflict perfectly. Culture screams strength, but biology whispers relaxation. Culture demands conscious control, but biology depends on these delicate automatic nerve signals. Culture expects performance under pressure, but the system itself is incredibly vulnerable to anxiety. They are just fundamentally at odds with each other.
So because of this total mismatch, any tiny little glitch can set off a fear of failure. And that fear, that feeling of anxiety and tension, is the exact opposite of the relaxation the body needs to perform. This creates a really powerful and often destructive psychological feedback loop. So here's a way to think about that loop. The biological event itself is just a physical process, right? But culture acts like a giant symbolic amplifier. It takes that event and just cranks up the volume on its meaning, turning it into a test of your entire identity, your whole worth as a man.
And all of that amplified meaning, well, it creates immense pressure to perform on command. It generates anxiety, worry, this desperate need to control a system that was just never designed for conscious control in the first place.
And that anxiety directly short-circuits the biology. The stress hormones that get released when you're anxious actually cause the smooth muscles in the erectile tissue to tense up, which blocks blood flow. So in other words, the cultural demand for performance actively sabotages the biological requirements for it. It's a perfect trap.
So how do we get out of this crisis in perception? Well, it starts by stepping back and seeing the entire system, not just obsessing over its individual parts.
The first step, really, is to just reject that old model. If we actually follow the evidence, it becomes so clear that manhood can't be some fixed identity that's based on something as fragile and as variable as sexual performance. The whole foundation is just too unstable.
Instead, what we call manhood is something that emerges from this incredibly complex system of interacting forces. It's the interplay between the biological hardware, our own individual psychology, those powerful cultural stories we've been talking about, and even the medical institutions that shape how we think about all this. Each part is constantly influencing all the others.
And this leaves us with one last, really crucial question. If manhood isn't just a simple biological fact defined by how one organ performs, but this complex thing that emerges from all these interacting systems, then what is it really? And how might we start to redefine it?